wonderful to see so many of you back here for this panel called Women Who Change the World, Stories to Inspire. It's a no-brainer when we're talking about trying to inspire people in education that we need to talk about trying to change the world, because the world needs us to change it. And bringing together a group of women who have and continue to change the world is what we've brought for you today. So I'll briefly introduce them, and this is a conversation. I do want to add Maxine McHugh, unfortunately, broke a part of her body recently, and she said she'd be so drugged up if she sat on this stage and might say things she regrets, so she's not here. Many of you know Monique Proud. You went to her workshop. Monique is the CEO of Cultural Grounding, and I heard such great stories coming out of her workshop. Could you please welcome Monique Proud? Gabbi Stroud inspired us this morning. I've never seen so many people cry and so many people wanting to burn buildings down at the same time. Complex, but welcome to the world. Please welcome Gabbi Stroud.
Thanks, girls. Thank you.
I first encountered Hana Assafri when I went to her amazing restaurant, the Moroccan Soup Kitchen. If you're in town, you need to go. And then she was on a panel on Q&A about feminism and changing the world, and we invited her on, and we are so blessed that she's here. Please welcome Hana Assafri. We call her family now. I think she spends more time here than she does in Scotland. You've been to the VR room. You've also been inspired. There's going to be this peak of people going to Scotland after, particularly in your suburb. Please welcome Dr. Claire Warden. And this is a conversation. I mean, I do have questions here, but we want each and every one of us to ask each other questions. But I'm going to start with a question. And I'll start with Hana. At the soul of your business is creating social change. You're a feminist. I don't know if you call yourself an Islamic feminist or just a feminist. You're a social change agent. And as soon as you walk into your restaurant, the Moroccan Soup Kitchen, you feel change. Tell us the story of how that got started.
How long have we got?
How long have you got or have we got?
Okay. Look, thank you, and certainly thank you for what I think is an absolutely timely coming together to talk about visions for the future when we find our leaders lacking vision, when we find a world so polarised, when we find a world that is hostile to minorities. And fittingly, and I think importantly, if we are trying to imagine a world that is founded on human rights, social justice and social harmony, we have to begin with a conversation of beyond the rhetoric around First Nations conversation. That this conversation for me, no matter our causes, whether our causes are women, asylum seekers, climate crisis, no matter the issues, that they are had on the backs of a land that has never been ceded and a tussle that First Nations are continuing to have in 2020 in a country that pays a lot of rhetoric. And we preface every occasion, and we do it well, with celebration, ceremonies and welcome, but that has not impacted and affected behavioural change. We all have a responsibility, no matter our causes, in changing that conversation. So I just wanted to start there. And secondly, thank you. And I think that is often these conversations are difficult to have because we have them as judgments. We're not casting judgment, we're actually inviting our communities and our society to do better on the issues of First Nations reconciliation in a real and meaningful way, where we become allies in that conversation, not only occasionally, but in everything we do. Social and community justice, in my perspective, is a perspective on life. It is not cause-specific. And if we are to genuinely work towards a better world, a world that is more reconciled, we have to come back to the very foundations and lean into the responsibility that comes with our privileges of being on these lands. So with that mindfulness and awareness, the Moroccan Soup Bar was born. And it was born specifically to redress the cycle of disadvantage for women, to circuit break the cycle of disadvantage through not just rhetoric and conceptualising a different world, but also in a practical way. Women and our conditioning has almost always been and our disadvantage has been had in kitchens. That the expectation is that women cook as a matter of course. We're not rewarded, we're not remunerated for those for the work that we do in kitchens, for child rearing, for a whole host of issues that is seen as women's work. That is the source of inequality in society. I sought to simply reframe those circumstances for women, that the cycle of disadvantage, if we begin with where women are at and we simply begin to remunerate and pay them for what they know how to do, as well as then walk with them on a journey of intervention where we can offer the support that is needed in those circumstances of crises, particularly around domestic violence and family violence, which are topical issues at the moment. So through that employment process, I guess the Moroccan Soup Bar was born, and it was an expression of a very crazy and unconventional idea that women can offer up a platform of hospitality, and it's our interpretation of hospitality, all the while being a space where social change is possible, not only for the women themselves who will be the future sources of social attitude change, but as well as that, engaging communities in social issues, particularly when we have seen and been witness to communities so absolutely disengaged, in particular around issues of Islam, Islamophobia, First Nations, constant issues that are going on, the climate, and so we embody a perspective and in fact invite our community and hope that they find something palatable in our establishments. One, and then I'll stop, but one main statistic, which I think now, 22 years later, is worthy of celebrating. Not one woman who has left a situation of family violence has gone back. Yet the statistics, ironically, in most public settings and institutions is that, oh yeah, women need to go back a number of times before they're ready. No, they don't. If our intervention is effective, if we respond to women along the way in a real and meaningful way, they don't need to go back. No woman wants to go back to a situation which puts her down, violates her, etc., etc. So I think the alternate model of and we will talk a little bit about how women back themselves in the unconventional modes of doing what we do in society to affect change for the future.
And it is unconventional. You still run speed date Muslim nights.
Yes, we do.
Where people can come and talk about those hard stuff face to face. But I remember the first time I went to your restaurant with some friends, and it's an interesting place, and you must go. I will be watching. You came up to my table and said, "Who did you vote for?"
You're not allowed to say that, apparently.
But we did.
But I didn't know you couldn't say that.
And I said, and we started speaking Arabic. And you're like, "Oh, Habibi, your family. You're not paying for your meal. It's free." And I'm like, I should have ordered more. But it was unconventional because you wouldn't let me pay. And you do have this saying, the left is right. And I was like, this is a very interesting establishment. Like, you can, and you sat there and you talk politics to most people in your restaurant. And I think that's a powerful thing because it's a safe place for people to gather. So there's something attractive about being unconventional, don't you think?
Look, it's essentially, and I think when these principles and values have been implicit in everything we used to do for 22 years. When we made them actively, publicly vocal is around, in Melbourne, the same-sex marriage campaign. That I've seen communities grow, an entire generation born during our time. And one day, this young boy who came in tears, and I said, "What is the matter?" And he said, today at school, he was crying. Today at school, they had a thing saying, "Vote no." And he was a child of rainbow family. And I said, "Come here." And then found myself absolutely spontaneously calling in the middle of dinner service and making an announcement, just kind of dinging on a glass and then thinking, shit, I better say something smart. I had no idea But I felt compelled to say something because it wasn't okay that we found ourselves scrutinising and judging and passing judgment on a small section of community, no matter what we thought, that was not progress. And I found that so difficult. So I invited the restaurant to consider that even if they thought no, that no matter our thinking, if they wanted to be afforded dignity and respect, they needed to afford it to somebody else. So I encouraged them to think no and vote yes.
Yeah, good on them. Monique, you're a proud Aboriginal woman, and it's so fitting that your surname is Proud, as your beautiful mother always reminds. Where's Auntie Denise? Give us a wave. There she is. I did invite Auntie Denise. If you change your mind, darling, you come up. You're more than welcome. Okay, honey. It's easy to see, I think it's easy to see the inspiration a strong Aboriginal mother has on a young Aboriginal woman, but you also stand on your own 2 feet. What inspires you to fight for what you believe in?
Big question. And I am a crier, so they've given me tissues behind me. But absolutely, you know, on this country, we've been on this land. We're one of the oldest living cultures on earth. And whenever I travel the country, our elders always say to me, Bub, we have always been here. Our artwork, our story, our ceremony, our dance, the way we transfer knowledge through the generations. I'm so lucky to have come from the family that I've come from. And the women in my family are just powerhouses, absolutely amazing. So I'm following in their footsteps. They've always given 110% to community. You know, when you come from an Aboriginal community, we have that big extended family network. We're connected to country, to totems, to land, to waterways, you know, to people. And sometimes people don't understand, you know, our connection doesn't have to be bloodline. You can have aunties and uncles that you call auntie and uncle from a respect kind of background. But yeah, I think it's those people that have paved the way for me that has really inspired me and created opportunities for me to have what I've had, and then it's my responsibility too to pass that down to the next generations. When our elders give us knowledge, in our culture it's sort of you're given knowledge when you're ready for it. And elders will tell you stories and they'll add information or subtract information to make sure that you're really, really listening. And then they get you to tell those stories in front of them to make sure that you are remembering the details. And when you're given that knowledge, you are responsible for that knowledge and to pass it on. So, you know, it's an absolute privilege to be here in this space today, and very powerful when I look out at Mum, and she was in my session yesterday, but, you know, my mum was not born a citizen of this country. We come from Queensland. She grew up under the Act, so she was classified as an inmate from the day she was born. And, you know, it's very recent history, and people people hear about things in the media, they think stolen generation or stolen wages, but people are detached from what that actually means and the intergenerational impact of those past policies. Even definitions of Aboriginality have always come down from the dominant discourse from a Western point of view. And so I think it's a real privilege to be here so that, you know, our voices are heard. You know, we define ourselves, and we can have that voice and share our knowledge to the broader community. And then once we share that knowledge, it's up to you guys to also pass it on. You've got that responsibility too.
Claire, I was just...
Amazing. Sorry, I was absorbed.
Yeah.
I was like, oh.
And please interrupt each other. Claire, I was just thinking when Monique was saying that often we're disconnected from what it's really like. The rhetoric, the words. I mean, you can You can write it, you can read it. Doesn't necessarily mean you can feel it. I know you're a great advocate for nature pedagogy, for us living in harmony with and valuing the environment. Maybe this is a question we already know the answer. I mean, let me reframe it then. We're in a crisis around the environment. You know, she's biting us back big time in many ways. Why do you think we're so disconnected?
I would take it back a bit and think that I find even that conversation quite interesting when people say to me, children are disconnected from nature, because my ontology, my worldview is that actually we're all part of a giant ecosystem. So unless you're in another frame that I don't know about, you're actually an integral part of the natural world. So, you know, when you start to think about how that system, how that whole thing is coming together, and it operates in a balance of the observable and the unobservable world, and living and the non-living, that needs to be respected, actually. And I think what's happened is that the human supremacy, that egocentrism that we look at across the world, has meant that we have destroyed things that we shouldn't have been doing. And for whatever reason, there are many, many different ways now to advocate for the natural world, to make it an ecological system, a balanced system, an ecological, not ego. So an ecological system. And I think when I set up Auckland, and some of you will have come through the virtual reality experience, someone said to me, did you set it up because you had this grand plan? And I said, no, I didn't set it up. I went to a meeting and I got so fed up of licensing saying, you can't do that. There was this inner something that happened, and I would say it was probably my mother, just going, well, you've got a choice here, Claire. Are you just going to sit there and comply, or are you going to be the bullshit woman you've always been? And I decided to be this person who would actually stand up and say, enough's enough. And so these things, I think there's serendipity happens in your life, and things are meant to come forward at a time when they're meant to happen. And this lady phoned me up and she said, I know you're this woman and I've heard about you. And I said, oh, great. And she said, I'd like to give you a house. And I went, right, okay, that's very nice.
Is that all you said?
Yeah, literally, that's all I said, right? And so I put the phone down and I said, this woman wants to give us a house. And the rest of my team just went, phone her up, phone her up. So I phoned her up, and that was the little cottage at Auckland Nature Kindergarten. And so it was set up really as a place to challenge establishment. And we talked about this earlier on. You can, go to loggerheads with those people, which many people do, and they fight the corner. My view on Auckland and the work I do now is to offer a challenge, which is also subversive, because we worked within that system to create this nature kindergarten, which was the first in Scotland. And it got so much attention and so many people started coming that the government came in covert visits to come and visit it, and then licensing came. So eventually what happened is that they could then say, well, actually, I'm quite impressed now. Now, after 8 to 10 years, they then decide, actually, I'm now going to adopt this idea, and we're going to put it forward now as part of the government strategy. And you're going, all right, whatever works for you. Because I think sometimes we need catastrophic events, like we're seeing around the world at the moment, to make us realise that actually humans aren't the most important thing on the planet, and microbes are. And so we need to really, I think, take the wake-up call that the planet is offering us and do something about it.
It's really interesting. Microbes.
Microbes.
Gabbi, you got a standing ovation this morning.
I just want to sit here and go, preach. I just want to be in the audience because these girls have got it, hey? And I'm just like, uh-oh.
It was, no, it was inspiring to hear how your story can change other people's stories. I think this is the power of a story. Feminists have known this for years. The story is the most powerful thing we have. It creates societal, structural power change. I'm not sure if you see your story as a big A activism or a small A activism. I personally believe all acts of activism are activism. It doesn't matter what we do. Do you see yourself as an activist? And what advice do you give? Because there are people here who are crying, jumping for joy, How do we make people become activists? So the first question was, do you see yourself as an activist, and what advice do you give to people?
I don't see myself as an activist. But now that you're saying that, I'm like, why is that? What's that about? And you know, something that keeps coming up for me in listening to all our stories is this idea of vision and someone being visionary. And, you know, in the examples that Claire and Hana have talked about, you know, and in your story too, you know, you've had a vision of how it could look, and you went ahead and you built it, you know, and then governments and institutions have turned around and went, oh, so that's how it could be done. And I realised that where I'm at is I'm still trying to rage against this machine. And what you guys are suggesting is that, you know, if you build it, then they will come. I don't know if I have the strength to build it. That seems a big proposition. But the thing I'm beginning to realise is that I have this expectation that the leaders that I've elected will have the vision and that they'll go ahead and build it for me. And it's a slow awakening to realise they're not going to. You know, they're not, I'm yet to see a leader, correct me if anyone's got one out there, but I'm not seeing any leaders with vision right now. And I think that's why my story resonates, because people are hungry for someone to tell the story and to talk about a vision and to have a different discourse. There's that sense of dissatisfaction. It's probably why all of our stories resonate with one another and with this audience, is we're hungering for that. We're longing for that. We're longing for people to say, we're a climate in crisis. We're longing for someone to say teachers and their students are struggling. We're longing for people to say there are whole communities that are being ignored here. So am I an activist? Probably not. I'm just telling my story and the world is ready to hear that. What advice do I give? Would probably be, we all need to be telling our story. We need to be putting that out there in a way that's, I suppose, meaningful and trying to find those spaces where our story can be provocative or confrontational so it can have currency and value. I spoke at an event in Melbourne, might have been 12 months ago, I guess. I met a teacher there and he bought multiple copies of my book and I was deeply touched. I said, this is lovely. He said, I'm sending one to all the ministers of education in all the different states. And then he got in touch with me again after that and he'd started a Facebook group and a blog. And he said, I've realised I need to be more active, an activist in my profession. You can't do it on your own, Gabbi. And I'm like, I'm not even doing that much, so good for you, mate. But, you know, I was really proud that he took courage from what I was doing to stand up in that way that he could. So I don't think I really answered that question, but I said some stuff. I filled the space. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
It reminds me of a quote by Margaret Wheatley where she says, the leaders we need are already here. And I think they're out there. It's always, it's kind of timely, and I think just fills your heart when you realise that sometimes those leaders that we need are the silent ones who are pushing forward in their own way. But this is a question to all of you, and let's have this conversation. It's sometimes fighting for what you believe makes you unpopular. Sometimes it means you're called a troublemaker, and sometimes other tribes start to infiltrate in ways that are unhelpful, because shutting down that dissident voice sometimes seems the best way when there's activism or what we would say social justice should prevail. How do you get through that? Like, I mean, it's hard, you know, you don't just get a box of inspirational quotes and go, now I feel good about myself. It's hard. Do you know? No, I don't. But I'm interested in when you face that challenge. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I don't think any of us kind of woke up going, I'm going to be an activist. I think we find ourselves in circumstances where what's unfolding around us becomes so intolerable that we need to say something. And anxiety and fear and whatever no longer is enough to keep us silent and quiet. So we feel anxious and we do it anyway. And I think the time's upon us, whether we like it or not, old modes of activism no longer work. We are living in a connected world. There's a whole host of unprecedented social tensions and factors that make the old modes of how we did activism no longer effective. We're also at a cusp of, I think, profoundly dangerous phenomenon. When I see a young generation who are extraordinary and brave in their thinking, who have no voice to governments, they're so disconnected, governments aren't listening, they're probably too young to even vote, yet their vision for a world, so just to your point, yes, they are visionary, but they don't have avenues. Then I find that we have that responsibility to offer platforms and spaces to be their ally in those conversations and be led by them and lead in the wisdom that we've developed over the years. So I think it's not a choice we make, and I think the time's upon us at the moment. The reality is women have always cleaned up messes. And that is not just a metaphor, this is the reality. That social change and social reform and changing societies for the better has always been led by women, yet historically we don't necessarily document them in the same way. We know Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi and Edie Mabo, and we should. But we say Septima Clark, most of us would scratch our head. Yet she was instrumental so in the human rights and social justice conversations. And these are the realities for women. So we innovate in a different way and we lead social change in a different way. And I think the times now, the only similarity is that women and our disobedience. So we are living during times where silence is no longer acceptable. Silence makes us complicit with a system that is emboldened inequality, who's struggling and hanging on for dear life and voting in the most emboldened misogynist across the globe, and we see this everywhere. So our silence, if we say nothing, then we are agreeing with them.
Yep.
And no matter what our spaces, no matter which platform we occupy, around the dinner table, in restaurants, in the middle of dinner service, sitting like this, we have a responsibility to articulate what we believe and to preserve the social values that we believe are important. And hopefully we continue to build and invite people to resonate with that vision. Now, women are doing it, and the discontent is largely driven by women and the young. It is absolutely. And I think that is where optimism and hope lies, and anyone who at some point in their lives resonates with being an activist. For me, it's a way of life. It's something, and these are our normal, these are our conditions. We do not have a choice to go, oh, today, no, I don't feel like, we just don't, that is not available to us. So everything I do is founded on the premise that human beings are decent. And human beings, we are living in a world where we get bombarded with so much information, so much false and alternate facts. And I think that's probably one of the most dangerous phenomenon. Yet at the same time, if you offer up something that is founded on the betterment of who we are, most people, even if you fumble your way through, most people will get on board those conversations, and they are being driven by women and the young.
Yeah.
I think just on this is working, on the previous point of being an activist, as an Aboriginal woman, I feel I was born an activist in our own country. You know, I was actually born in Denver, Colorado, but I feel like, you know, that sense of justice and social equity, it just runs through my blood. It's who we are. And I think, you know, a lot of my schools that I went to, I was the only Indigenous student in the school. There was a lot of racism and different things but I always was grounded in my culture and my community. And I think even if you're the single voice standing up against a whole sea that is trying to tell you, no, you know, you're wrong, if you have that self-belief, if you know, like in our culture, we always go for knowing who you are and where you come from, that grounded in self. And that's why my business is called Cultural Grounding, because that culture is what drives us. And that, you know, I hate seeing people be silent, because it is, you know, it causes so many problems. I think we all have a voice, and we need to get up and stand up for what we believe in. And that's how I've been raised. You know, you don't walk past someone in the street that's hurting. You put yourself in their shoes. And my nana used to always say 2 words to mum, which was "Dan Najinbari." And there's no English translation, and we were talking earlier about some of our concepts. When we translate it to English, it sort of makes it into a narrower thing. But Dan Najinbari is sort of, the closest thing is empathy. But what it really is really putting yourself in the shoes of that other person, feeling what they're feeling. And I think if each of us do that, when we come across a situation that, you know, might shock us or make us feel uncomfortable, or, you know, you don't really know how to act, really start, you know, trying to understand from other people's perspectives. I don't know if that tied in either to what we were talking about.
No, it's critical. It kind of leads to some reflections around, we absolutely do need to talk up. We were gifted with that voice. I also think that sometimes it's hard to find your voice. You can become crushed in different ways for different reasons. And I'm wondering if any of you have found yourself sitting silent not because you don't believe in it, but you've been crushed so much, and how you regain confidence, not there and then necessarily, but later, to find your voice.
I can talk about that one. I've got an answer. It's a bit like a job interview, and you're concentrating really hard and you don't want to get the answer wrong. And the thing that I realised, so I had left the profession of teaching, I'd left my marriage, brought my whole life to ground zero. I was so stony broke, it was embarrassing. And I had this book deal, and I was working on the book, my memoir, at the ripe old age of 40, called Teacher, and it was just such a full gamble. And, you know, you mentioned the word, Hana, like back yourself, you know, and so I was just, back yourself, Gab, you're going to have to try and make something of this book. And anyway, so I wrote this book, and, you know, it was a lot of hard work. It was a very cathartic process, a lot of self-reflection. And then there's this sort of horrible pause after you have written the book, and then it's going through all the publication process and getting a cover and all of that sort of stuff. And there's the waiting, and I was terrified of 2 things, success and failure. Both of them were, you know, like, oh my God, what if this is a raging success? I've just written about burnout and being on antidepressants and seeing a psychologist and my marriage going down the shitter, and oh my God, and what if everyone reads it? And then there was the other flip side of, what if it's a complete failure and I don't make any money out of it, and people mock me and shame me and make fun of me, and oh my God. So everywhere I looked, life was just really, really scary. And it felt very much as though what I'd done was walk myself down a big, long, dark tunnel, you know, and how there's that saying, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I just felt like I was at the end of the tunnel going, well, where's the freaking light, man? I did all the walking. Like someone said, there would be a light here, and it's not here. And then this amazing thing happened, because when the book came out, teachers, beautiful, beautiful teachers, lit their little light next to me at the end of that, I'm going to get upset, at the end of that dark tunnel. And they went, I'm standing here with you too. Where's the light? You know, there's this collective lifting up that can happen when we share our stories, even those stories where we feel so vulnerable and unprotected and scared, because what happens then is it gives other people permission to say, yeah, I feel that too. And then that's really empowering, and then we find our voice, and it's not just our voice, lowercase o, I can do that thing. It's like capital O, our voice that is found. And that's incredibly empowering and uplifting. And look, it doesn't change the fact that you're at the end of a really shitty black tunnel. You're still there, but you've got a lot of light, and there's that sense of solidarity and people around you. And just on sort of a micro level, I find that sometimes I'll write something and it'll be put up for publication on a website, and then the comments come in. And like I've learnt, just don't read the comments. Just don't read the comments, because people will hate you, and I've got to be okay with that. But the other thing I've noticed is people will go into bat for you as well. You know, those beautiful people who are standing at the end of the tunnel with their little light will go, no, what you're misunderstanding is this, and a conversation happens, and that's a great thing. So that's my response to that question.
It's interesting, it reminds me, thank you. I hadn't even met Claire, and I was hearing Anthony Saman hates Claire Warden. And I'm like, did you hear that?
I did.
I did too. And I'm like, I don't even know her. Should I hate her?
You know what it was? It was somebody had actually, and this is the bizarre thing about, you know, putting your head above that parapet and saying, all right, I'm just going to risk it and I'm going to say something. And then there's that fear of rejection. All the stuff that you carry with you from your childhood comes rushing to the fore. They'll laugh at me, I'll be ridiculed, and all of that. So there I am, and I'm feeling, okay, people are beginning to stand up with me. This is nice. People are talking about nature pedagogy. And then it was some years ago, and someone said, it's all over for you. Anthony Saman doesn't like you. At which point my little inner self went, oh, shit. Didn't know who he was, I never met the guy. I mean, you just think, and that's the bit I hate about social media, is the myths, the manipulations, the falsehoods. And so then I went, well, I've never met him. How does he know? He doesn't believe in your nature pedagogy. I said, sorry, he hasn't even had a conversation with me about my nature pedagogy, and I haven't even written it myself yet, so we can't know what it's all about. And then
we met in Singapore. At the same time, we're going, awkward moment.
It was, and it was just like, there he is. And then, within the first few minutes, we were great. But you could easily have taken that and gone out like the wounded soldier and said, well, I'm going to give up now. You know, I don't need to do any more because Anthony's rejected me. Whereas, actually, it was, I don't know who even did it, and that's my sadness about, I think probably true for all of us, is that there's an issue when people see, I think primarily women as well, in a successful situation.
I think that's what it was about.
They then want to bring it down. There's a need to destroy success, which I think is the bizarrest of behaviours. But I see it time and time again, and sometimes it's the vicious comments. And I have no problem with comment, but I want people to look me in the eye. I don't want them to hide and then do it in an insidious way that means they're not held accountable to their opinion. So I agree, I don't read comments much, and I do get emotionally really upset by them.
I read one comment once where someone had written, could we stop hearing from that teacher who quit teaching and now writes about it and makes all these millions? And I was like, show me the millions. Is it me? Are you talking about me? Because I haven't got the millions. And when I do, I'll be stopping writing for sure. But I was just like, that was the one comment that I was like, I so want to reply to this one. But I just let it go, and
I think, did you want to say something? Just on social media and women and adversity and what are the ingredients which make us who we are and do what we do? I'm somebody who probably 20 years ago, if you'd asked me what would I do differently in my life, I would have gone, do away with the sexual abuse, do away with the domestic violence, do away with the Islamophobia, which plays itself out. 20 years later, fast forward, I think all those realities, as they intersect, form not only who you are, but your ability to have empathy, to connect with issues, with others, and to advocate a vision that is founded on justice. So in adversity, there's always opportunity. I'm not saying go out and seek adversity, but when and if, and often it is a reality for women. We live in systems of inequality and by extension violate us. And then there's the interplay of all these other factors. My response, though, and interestingly, that we are living during a very bizarre world where I find the doublespeak difficult. So on the one hand, we've got governments around the world, and in Australia, and we're talking about the epidemic of violence towards women. And we go, oh, we want to do away with it, we want to be able to change attitudes and la la la. Yet at the same time, what is being signalled by governments in all leadership positions is the opposite of that. That our attitude and behaviour when our leaders and our governing kind of leadership, like Scott Morrison, puts his hand in Donald Trump and says to him, I endorse and support your values. You are a friend to Australia. You signal to both men and women that sort of profanity and misogyny is acceptable. How do you then want to change attitudes? That hollow doublespeak is in fact making both men and women and non-gender binary and everybody in between, that giving mixed signals about the serious nature. Now, I'm not going to politicise it, but I will. The death of Hana Clark and her children, our leadership stood up there and sang Amazing Grace and felt that was an appropriate response, did not signal any policy shift towards changing the attitude towards women. Now, these sorts of behaviours, and that is exactly what I mean about if we are to change the conversation, we need to change our behaviour when it comes to women. Which brings me to social media. To me, social media is like a violent relationship. Or a toxic, rather, relationship. You have to be really aware before you embark on it. There are attributes or aspects of it that connect people, but it comes with the consequence of being, and when I found myself in the snake pit of social media, the most difficult aspect for me, not only not reading the comments, but that it's anonymous. And when it's anonymous, it's everybody. You make it everybody. You look around and you think, is it that person? Is it that person? It could be that person. And that is for somebody, and certainly for women, when these are platforms that are not regulated, where it's okay and acceptable to not only speak of women in the most disgusting of ways, in the most violent of ways, and then turn around and say, we want to do away with the epidemic of violence against women. No, you don't. I'm not saying let's censor. But what I'm saying is everything in life is regulated. And this is a platform that is now a public platform that needs to be regulated and made safe for those who use it. So
I was thinking about you after that Q&A, I have to say, because I just thought that poor bugger. I wonder what's going to happen on her social media. And I wasn't surprised that you released a video the day after and said, I stand in solidarity with men. I'm non-violent. I would never... And I didn't want to raise it, but I thought you've sacked stuff around social media, and I thought, you know, I don't know if the word is brave that you did that, because I can't imagine what would have happened on social media where your words would have been misinterpreted or you put on the back of someone else's words.
Look, the difficulty is we are Muslim women and we don't have the luxury and privilege to just, without understanding the impact and consequences of what we say and do. Islam, whether we like it or not, has been under so much scrutiny in this country and certainly in the Western world for the past 2 decades. Hostility towards Muslims has reached fever pitch, and these aren't just conceptual contestations of ideas that we don't like, they translate to women bearing the brunt of those attitudes through random attacks on the street, aggressive behaviours, and this is a reality, this is what happens. So on Q&A, I was never going to be the stereotype who defaults to violence. We always think Islam is barbaric and backward and violent. I had so many things to say, but I have to consider so many other layers before I even speak. That is my speaking position. And secondly, everything we do is about building communities, building bridges. It is not about further polarisation and cementing the polarisation. And then lastly, I personally think it's far more radical for women to lead and imagine a world free from violence when we seek to contest the social inequality, when we seek to deal with conflict? How do we imagine, through the wisdom and leadership of women, with men as our allies, a different world? Not succumbing to same. To me, that's not radical. That is a reality I've lived, and I find no safe space in it. And ultimately, those that are most marginalised and most vulnerable in military might, in physical might, will always, it becomes a slippery slope. They will be worse off in that dialogue.
Wow, we're looking for a rising up. And I think a rising up, and that is poetic justice, I take that, but we were talking about more than poetic license. But if we imagine a rising up to create change where the multiplying force of an individual is greater than we can ever imagine, how do we make that happen? How can each person here, who we hope is inspired by something, like they've heard a message, regardless of what session they went to, whatever they've encountered, how does that multiplying force begin? What can they do in a really practical way? I'd love to hear briefly from each and every one of you. Anyone can start. We don't have to delineate. It's a postmodern world.
Looking at me now, it's like,
I can start. Because the first thing that immediately comes to mind, particularly for this audience, is we teach children. You know, so if we want to multiply out a be better, you know, these visions that we're talking about, it starts with the children. You know, that's where it starts. And I just think there's such... People ask me, oh, do you despair about education? Would you tell people not to study, to go into education? Look, no, being a teacher, educating is the most important job. It is such a privilege because of children. Like, that's the hope. That's where it's at. And I love spending time with my own daughters, and you know, they hear stories about how things were even such a short time ago as when I was at school, and old beliefs and things like that, and they're like, really, Mum? The world was like that? And the fact that they marvel at that, and that they think that I saw that in my lifetime, that empowers me. That makes me feel good, because I think, yeah, and you are going to go forth believing that these things are possible, that women can do these things, that words are powerful, that you can be social agents of change. I love that they have that belief. And, you know, as educators, that's an empowerment that we can hand on to the children that we see in front of us each day.
Fantastic. Thank you. Claire, brief response. What do you think? How do we start this change?
I think it's about, part of it is about the relational ontology. So for me, people think that the nature pedagogy is something other, but it's about us. And so if you do nothing else, it's about looking inside yourself to who you believe you are in that intuitive sense. And then, you know, when you're looking out of that, I mean, it's about doing the simplest of things, about opening the window. It's about enjoying the rain. It's about walking under the shadow of a tree. It's picking up a leaf, but not in a way where you see the natural world as something to objectify. It's not something that you have a power and a right to have. It's a gift. It's something that you need to relish and cherish. And it's only when each of us does that I think that really we will start to flourish as a human species.
Monique.
I think it's really special for us all to be here on this earth at this time in history. And we are all living and breathing now in nature. You know, we're not disconnected. And I think that people need to find their passion, and it's great to see so many people at this conference, you know, inspired and passionate about the work that you do. I think everyone has a culture, everyone has an identity. We're complex beings with multi-layers. So I think find your passion, go for it. Adopt a mindset of curiosity and growth. Don't let, you know, fear of failure or, you know, we were talking about creativity and the way that children just play freely. You know, play doesn't need an outcome or a purpose. It just is. And I think having that kind of drive, experiment, talk to new people, communities. And I think when we're living in relation to one another, which is what we've been doing as humans for thousands of years, but we can be vulnerable and strong. It's that balance when you're living with, you know, with other people. I think sometimes society with social media and everything, we're detaching ourselves. But really, we're all connected. And I think if we draw on that and use that, and together, you know, that's how change is made. That's where the swell happens. And whenever I feel sort of down, that's the first thing I do, connecting back to culture, community, country. And that just drives me. That just, you know, gets me going. So, yeah.
Perfect. Hana?
Two things. I've always got two things, more than one. I think we've stopped being curious. As a society, in order to progress, to look into the future, we've now got the conditions that are making us retract and fear. Fear has become such an underpinning conversation, the way our governments speak, the way the media reports on stuff, even like the coronavirus, we're talking about it like it's the end of the world. Facts and truth no longer matter. And I just think if we are to sustain into the future, we need to preserve and safeguard. Facts and truth are allies to social justice, to humanity, to our capacity to reason, to look at one another with curiosity. When we're afraid, when the betterment of ourselves is never going to be had. So with that openness and curiosity and creating those conditions, the importance of seeing ourselves in the causes of others as well, that we have created the conditions where we compete for spaces around social justice. These are all expressions of the same system, a materialistic system who's so disengaged, where we are hostile to women, to the climate, to asylum seekers, to First Nations. They're all an expression of a system of inequality. And until we can all resonate with that system and understand that this is, if we are people that are about plurality, respect, progress, humanity, then we need to be able to be allies to the Muslim woman. We're allies to First Nations people, to the climate, to asylum seekers, not only to a cause specific. Because if that cause continues the inequality, it will implode in on itself.
Could you join me in thanking these women who've changed the world? Monique, Gabbi, Stroud, Hana Assafri and Warden.